The Nutcracker and the Mouse King by ETA Hoffman. Chapter 13. The Capital of Toyland. The little Nutcracker again clapped his small hands, and then the Rose Lake grew more agitated. The waves washed higher on the shore, and Mary saw coming towards her from the distance a boat or floating chariot in the form of a shell, like one glowing, sun-bright, sparkling gem, drawn along by 2 gold-scaled dolphins. 12 dear little Moors, dressed in caps and pinafores woven out of hummingbirds' feathers, sprang on shore, and carried first Mary, then Nutcracker, softly passing over the waves into the boat. Oh, how nice it was when Mary drove off through the rose spray and the rose waves. The 2 gold-scaled dolphins lifted up their heads and spouted crystal jets high into the air. And as they fell back in gleaming and sparkling rainbows, 2 sweet voices, like little bells of silver, seemed to be singing. Who sails upon the rosy sea? A darling fairy it must be. Little fly, shoo, shoo, little fish, boo, boo, swans, ta-ta, goldfinch, tra-la, stream, run low, winds, soft blow, all peace today, for here comes a fay. But the little Moors, who had jumped up onto the back of the chariot, appeared not to like the singing of the water jets, for they kept shaking their parasols, so that the date palm leaves, of which these were made, rattled and rustled, and at the same time the whole 12 stamped with their feet to an odd kind of tune, and sang for their part. Clack, click, click, clack, up and down, down and up. Us boys like a noise, fish jump, swans flap, shell coach rumble, jumble, tumble. Up and down, down and up. Click, clack, clack, click. Moors are very merry people, said the Nutcracker, somewhat put out by their din, but they will set the whole lake in an uproar if they let us go on so. Indeed, there soon broke loose a confused tumult of extraordinary voices, which seemed to be floating all around in the air and the water. Yet Mary did not mind them, but looked hard down into the scented rose waves, out of which a sweet, pleasant girl's face smiled back to her. "Ah!" she cried joyfully, clapping her little hands. "Ah, just look, Herr Drosselmeyer, down there is the Princess Pirlipat, who smiles at me so graciously. Do look, dear Herr Drosselmeyer." But Nutcracker sighed almost mournfully, and said, "Oh, dearest Miss Stahlbaum, that is not the Princess Pirlipat. That is always and only yourself, always only your own pretty face, that smiles so sweetly out of the rose waves." At this, Mary quickly drew her head back, shut her eyes tight, and felt much ashamed. Next moment she was lifted out of the shell chariot and carried on shore by the 12 boys. She found herself in a small thicket, almost more beautiful than the Christmas tree would, so brightly did everything here shine and glitter, especially admirable being the foreign fruits that hung on all the trees, and were not only of singular colors, but also had a wonderfully fine smell. "This is Confection Grove," Nutcracker told her, "but there is the capital." What now did Mary see? How shall I attempt to describe to you, dear children, the beauty and splendor of the city, which stretched itself far over a flowery plain before her eyes? Not only were the walls and towers gay with the most splendid colors, but the form of the building was such as you never saw on earth. For instead of thatch, the houses had beautifully carved crowns on the top of them, and the towers were capped by the most lovely gay garlands ever seen, like the ornaments of a wedding cake. When they passed through the gate, which looked as if it were built of macaroons and candied fruit, a band of silver-papered soldiers presented arms, and a little man in a brocaded dressing gown threw his arms round Nutcracker's neck with the words, "Welcome, noble prince, welcome to Confectionerberry." Mary was not a little astonished to see young Drosselmeyer recognized as a prince by this highly distinguished person. But now she heard a confused outburst of tiny voices mingling together, such a cheering and laughing, such a playing and singing, that she could think of nothing else, and asked the little Nutcracker what this meant. "Oh, my good Miss Stahlbaum," answered he, "this is nothing remarkable. Confectionerberry is a prosperous, lively city, and every day some kind of amusement goes on here. But be pleased to come a little farther." A few steps brought them out upon the great marketplace, which presented a splendid sight. All the houses round it were of open sugar-work, story rising over story. And in the middle stood a tall, sugar-coated cake tree, like a monument. And on each side of this, a very skillfully made fountain spouted in the air lemonade, ginger beer, and other nice drinks, while into the basins below ran pure, rich cream which you might spoon up at once without any further trouble. But prettier than all were the dear little people who swarmed around by thousands, in and out, hurrahing and laughing and joking and singing. In short, raising that merry din which Mary had already heard from some way off. There were finely dressed ladies and gentlemen, Arabs and Greeks, Highlanders and Indians, officers and soldiers, shepherds and soldiers, grand Turks and tomfools, harlequins and columbines, in fact, all kinds of people you would find in the world. At one corner the tumult grew greater. The people thronged together, for just then the Grand Mogul had himself carried by in a palanquin, attended by 93 grandees of his realm. But it happened that at the other corner of the Guild of Fishermen, 500 strong were holding their festival, and it was a pity that at the very same time the Turkish Sultan had the idea of taking a ride over the marketplace with 300 janissaries, and yet another solemn procession, clanging and chorusing, crowded round the cake tree. What a pressing and pushing and shoving and quarreling then came about! Soon, too, there were many cries of distress, for in the crush a fisherman had knocked off a Brahmin's head, and the Grand Mogul was nearly upset by a tomfool. Wilder and wilder rose the din, and the crowds were already falling to blows, when that man in a brocaded gown who at the gate had greeted the Nutcracker as prince climbed up on the cake tree, and, after 3 times ringing a very clear tinkling bell, called out thrice, "Confectioner! Confectioner! Confectioner!" At once the tumult was calmed, every one trying to escape from the confusion as best as he could. And when the entangled processions had got clear of each other, the muddied Grand Mogul had been brushed clean, and the Brahmin's head set on again, the merry uproar broke forth anew. "What does it mean, that confectioner, dear Herr Drosselmeyer?" asked Mary. "Ah, my good Miss Stahlbaum," answered Nutcracker, "confectioner is the name given here to an unknown but very dreadful power, of which people believe that it can do with them what it will. It is the fate that rules over this little merry folk, and they fear it so much that through the mere mention of its name, the greatest tumult can be appeased, as Mr. Burgermeister has just shown us. Every one of them thinks no more of earthly things, of pushes in the ribs and bumps on the head, but retires into himself and asks seriously, "What is man, and what is his destiny?" Mary could not restrain a loud cry of wonder, nay, of the highest amazement, when she all at once saw standing before her, bathed in rosy light, a brightly lighted castle with 100 magnificent towers. Here and there the walls were decorated with rich bouquets of violets, lilies, tulips, stocks, and the like, the duller tints of which set off the dazzling white of the groundwork shimmering in rosy light. The great dome of the central building, as well as the pyramid-formed caps of the towers, were dotted with thousands of sparkling gold and silver stars. "Now we are before Rock Castle," said Nutcracker. Mary was quite overwhelmed by the view of this enchanted palace, yet she did not fail to notice that the summit of one great tower was wholly missing, which a gang of small mannikins, standing on a scaffold of cinnamon sticks, seemed engaged in restoring. Even before she could ask Nutcracker the meaning of this, he went on, "A short time ago this fine castle was exposed to serious danger, if not utter destruction. The giant Guzzle, happening to pass by, hit one tower right off, and was already gnawing at the great dome when the confectioner-berry people brought him a whole quarter of their city as tribute, and a good slice of Jamshire as well, with which he consented to be fed off, and went on his way." At this moment a soft, pleasing strain of music was heard, the gate of the castle opened, and out stepped 12 small pages bearing lighted cloves in their hands by way of torches. Their heads consisted of a single pearl, their bodies of rubies and emeralds, and so they walked along very fine upon little feet of pure gold. They were followed by 4 ladies, almost as large as Mary's doll, Clara, but so extraordinarily majestic and gorgeously arrayed, that not for a single moment could Mary mistake them for anything but born princesses. "Oh, my prince! Oh, my dear prince! Oh, my brother!" they exclaimed, embracing Nutcracker in the tenderest manner, and one could not be sure whether they were about to laugh or to cry for joy. Nutcracker seemed to be much moved. He wiped away a crowd of tears from his eyes, took Mary by the hand, and spoke movingly. "This is Miss Mary Stahlbaum, the daughter of a most respectable physician and the preserver of my life. Had she not thrown her slipper at the right time, had she not furnished me with a sword of the pensioned cursor colonel, I should now be lying in my grave, bitten to pieces by the accursed Mouse King. Oh, this Miss Stahlbaum, tell me, is Pirlipat, even though a princess by birth, her equal in beauty, heart, and virtue? No, I say no." "No!" cried all the ladies, and fell upon Mary's neck, sobbing out, "Oh, you noble preserver of our dear princely brother, excellent Miss Stahlbaum!" Now the ladies led Mary and Nutcracker within the castle, and into a hall, the walls of which were of clear, sparkling, and glowing crystal. But what pleased Mary above all the rest was the dear little chairs, tables, sofas, and so forth, standing round about, which were made of cedar or mahogany wood, inlaid with gold flowers. The princesses requested Mary and Nutcracker to sit down, and said that they themselves would at once get a meal ready. Then they brought out a number of little pots and dishes made of the finest porcelain, also spoons, knives and forks, graters, stewpans, and other kitchen utensils of gold and silver. Next, they brought out the most beautiful tarts and sugar stuffs, such as Mary had never seen, and in the most elegant manner, with all their small snow-white hands, began to peel the fruit, to pound the spices, to rub down the sugar sticks, in short, so to play the housewife that Mary could well see how these princesses were at home in the kitchen, and what a rich meal was to be set before her. Feeling conscious that she could now show herself mistress of such matters, she secretly wished the princesses would let her assist in their work. As if she had guessed Mary's wish, the most beautiful of Nutcracker's sisters reached out over to her a small gold mortar with the words, "Oh, sweet friend, dear preserver of my brother, please break a little bit off this sugar stick." While Mary now pounded away at the mortar so heartily that it sounded quite pleasant, as if a pretty tune were being chimed forth, Nutcracker began to relate in full how the grim battle between his army and the Mouse King's had gone, how he had been beaten through the cowardice of his troops, how then the hateful Mouse King would have bitten him all to pieces, and how, therefore, Mary had been obliged to sacrifice many of his subjects, persons in her service, etc., etc. During this narrative, it seemed to Mary as if his words, even her own strokes in the mortar, grew fainter and stranger. Soon she saw the silver floor rising up like thin clouds of mist, in which floated the princesses, the pages, Nutcracker, her own self. Her ears were filled with the queer singing and ringing and burning that died away in the distance. Now she rose upon swelling waves, higher and higher, higher and higher, higher and higher.